Welcome to Frontlines of Social Good, the weekly news and views program from the Philanthropy Mastermind series. I'm Jay Frost. We'll begin, as always, with the top 5 gifts of the week, and then take a deep dive into one of the top stories of the week, Foundations Under Fire. For insights on this topic, I'll be joined today by Dr. Guadalupe Correa Cabrera, professor at George Mason University and co-director of the Terrorism, Transnational Crime, and Corruption Center, to explore George Soros's Open Society Foundations, which are now facing new waves of federal scrutiny. Later, in our book Nook, I'll talk with Mark Pittman, author of The Surprising Gift of Doubt, about how uncertainty can actually strengthen our leadership, deepen our confidence, and help us to build more authentic connections in our work and in our lives. Let's get started. Here are this week's top 5 gifts. And number 5, once again, is a tie. $10 million. The first of the two is from Kim and John Shirley to New York Presbyterian Center for Youth Mental Health. It establishes the Eric Shirley Suicide Prevention Initiative to advance youth mental health care, including a new tool to help emergency clinicians identify and support at-risk young people. Also at $10 million, and number 5, Deborah and George W. Couch, a gift to the Washington University School of Medicine. This will be an endowed support to push personalized medicine into the therapeutic realm, fueling the Genome Engineering Center, and celebrated with the naming of the Deborah and George W. Couch III Biomedical Research Building. Number 4 this week, $15 million from David Koch Jr.'s foundation to Stanford Medicine. It launches the Kidney Health Innovation Program to accelerate discoveries in pediatric nephrology, fund multi-year catalyst grants, and expand research and clinical care for children with kidney disease. At number 3, $25 million from Harry W. Bass Jr., or rather the Harry W. Bass Jr. Foundation, via Southwestern Medical Foundation, to the UT Southwestern and Children's Health of Dallas. It supports construction of a new joint pediatric campus, including Moody Children's Hospital. The specialty center will feature Harry W. Bass Jr.'s foundation lobby, named for, of course, Harry W. Bass. Number 2, $100 million from the New Balance Foundation to Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. It backs the West Tower of the Philip and Susan Ragon building, anchoring world-class heart and vascular care, and the facility will be named the New Balance Foundation Tower. And number 1 this week is a gift in US dollars of $145.6 million from Stan Perrone Charitable Foundation to the University of Western Australia and Partners in Perth. It funds the Rare Care Comprehensive Center to transform care for children with rare and undiagnosed diseases. Have we missed a big gift announcement this week? We almost certainly have. Please let us know so we can list it next time. You can contact me directly through LinkedIn or by email at j@donorsearch.net. Today, in a departure from our prior programs, we're taking a deep dive into a fast-moving story and the undercurrents beneath it. The administration's new directives to investigate America's grant-making foundations, and one foundation and its founder in particular. Before we get into policy, however, let's get a quick sense of scale. According to Giving USA, Americans have given an estimated $592.5 billion to charity in 2024, a rebound year powered by stock market gains and GDP growth. Giving rose 6.3% in current dollars, or 3.3% after adjustment for inflation. It's a big number. And individuals still supply the biggest share of philanthropy, but foundation grant making topped $100 billion for the third straight year, at about $109.8 billion in 2024. So who is behind this growth and where's that money going? Let's look at some numbers. Based on IRS filings, there are now 112,733 U.S. private foundations filing a 990 PF. That's the annual tax return for both non-operating and private operating foundations, distinguished from the 990 completed by charitable organizations. Of those, 71% indicated that they do not accept unsolicited requests, meaning only about 29%, or fewer than 33,000, are open to fundraising appeals. Among the largest private foundations, or those with assets over $100 million, 38% accept unsolicited requests, suggesting more openness with greater scale. A survey by Candid finds the median payout rate for independent foundations was 5% in the last fiscal year, consistent with the legal minimum, and with many funders, in fact, exceeding it. Heading into this year, 37% of foundations said they expected to increase giving, 54% expected to hold steady, and 9% anticipated decreases driven by endowment performance, donor-advised fund flows, and strategic adjustments. In a follow-up survey, Candid found that 1 in 5 foundations, just 21%, reported that they plan to change grant-making focus due to post-election policy changes, most commonly to backfill government funding cuts and support civil rights, democracy, and immigration-related work, while 4 in 5 are trying to stay the course but keep flexibility for grantees that are under strain. The bottom line? The U.S. Foundation Center is both large and consequential, moving more than $100 billion annually in grants, with dollars spread across virtually every area of public life. It's also sensitive to markets and policy. When assets rise, grants often follow. When policy shocks hit, some funders pivot to stabilize the safety net, or perhaps to guard against criticism. This summer, the push to scrutinize the nonprofit sector generally and grant-making foundations specifically has intensified with the release of 2 White House memoranda. On August 28th, the president signed a directive titled Use of Appropriated Funds for Illegal Lobbying and Partisan Political Activity by Federal Grantees. In it, the White House states, quote, federal funding reviews have revealed that taxpayer funds are being spent on grants with highly political overtones, end quote, and ordered that the Attorney General should investigate possible misuse of federal grant dollars for lobbying or electioneering. 4 weeks later, on September 25th, just a few days ago, the president issued National Security Presidential Memorandum Countering Domestic Terrorism and Organized Political Violence. This document frames a surge in politically motivated violence as, quote, not a series of isolated incidents, end quote, and directs Treasury, Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, and the Internal Revenue Service to identify and disrupt financing networks that, quote, fund domestic terrorism and political violence, including actions to, again, quote, ensure that no tax-exempt entities are directly or indirectly financing political violence or domestic terrorism, with potential referrals for investigation and possible prosecution. A companion White House fact sheet describes, quote, comprehensive strategy to investigate, disrupt, and dismantle all stages of organized political violence, and includes attention to funding mechanisms and, again, quote, non-governmental organization involvement. How did we get here? One possible recent cause was the murder of Charlie Kirk, founder of Turning Point USA and a close ally of the administration, which the administration describes as part of a broader pattern of political violence. In the days leading up to the memoranda, the White House was reportedly preparing an order on political violence, while liberal nonprofits warned of potential overreach. In fact, more than 100 groups were already organizing a public response in anticipation. By the time the second memo appeared, attention had zeroed in on Open Society Foundations, OSF, the global philanthropy founded by George Soros. In response, OSF wrote, the Open Society Foundations unequivocally condemn terrorism and do not fund terrorism. These accusations are politically motivated attacks on civil society meant to silence speech the administration disagrees with and undermine the First Amendment, end quote. Recently, the president told reporters, I believe in a scrum, if you look at Soros, he's at the top of everything, end quote, and floated prosecutions of people who, quote, financially support so-called, quote, left-wing terrorism, end quote. The Guardian newspaper notes that there's no evidence linking George Soros to terrorism and quotes scholars and strategists warning that the rhetoric could send a chilling message to other major donors. To understand who's in the crosshairs and potentially why, let's briefly profile the organizations most frequently named in the materials and news reports, how they're related to one another, and what, in fact, they actually fund. Founded by George Soros in the 1980s, OSF supports civil liberties, accountable government, independent journalism, public health, Roma inclusion, and justice reform worldwide, according to their website and other published documents. In recent years, OSF announced a 100 million euro commitment to launch a Roma Foundation in Europe and a $400 million initiative for green jobs. The foundation says its activities are peaceful and lawful, and that grantees are expected to comply with human rights principles and applicable laws. U.S. grantees reportedly have included the ACLU, Equal Justice Initiative, Indivisible, Move On, Planned Parenthood, the National Immigration Law Center, and the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, underscoring its broad civil rights footprint. Who is George Soros, and why is his name so frequently mentioned? Born György Schwarz in Budapest in 1930, he survived the Nazi occupation with his family using false identity papers and left communist Hungary for London in 1947, studying at the London School of Economics before moving to the US to work in finance. He founded the Soros Fund Management in 1970 and later helped establish Central European University in 1991. Beginning in 1979, Soros's philanthropy focused on, quote, opening closed societies, providing scholarships for Black South Africans under apartheid, support for dissidents in independent culture in Eastern Europe, and later a global network that became Open Society Foundations, or OSF. In 2017, OSF announced Soros had transferred $18 billion to sustain its work, bringing his lifetime giving to more than $32 billion. And on January 4th, 2025, before the transition here in Washington, D.C., President Joe Biden awarded George Soros the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor. Soros grounded his philosophy his philanthropy in philosopher Karl Popper's idea of an open society, where there's, as he understood it, democratic governance, free expression, and individual rights. Over time, his grant-making touched human rights, public health, Roma inclusion, criminal justice reform, and independent journalism on several continents. In Soros's own words, quote, I believe that in philanthropy, one should do the right thing, whether or not it succeeds. And we'll go back to that concept later in our interview. Soros is also known, admired by some, and criticized by others for his role in financial history. In September 1992, during Black Wednesday, his fund shorted more than $10 billion worth of pounds. After the UK left the European Exchange Rate Mechanism, or ERM, he reportedly profited over $1 billion, earning the moniker the man who broke the Bank of England. He also faced legal scrutiny in France, where courts ultimately upheld an insider trading conviction tied to late 1980s stock dealings, although Soros himself has denied any wrongdoing, saying he relied on public information. In U.S. politics, Soros has funded progressive causes and candidates, backing Democratic super PACs, and since 2016, contributing seven-figure sums to local district attorney races that prioritized criminal justice reform. In 2022, he was cited as the U.S. donor of the largest U.S. donor of that particular election cycle. Today, at 95, Soros remains a towering, if sometimes polarizing figure, an investor turned philanthropist whose giving was an effort to reshape parts of civil society and whose name has become shorthand in political fights. A quick note on Open Society Foundations, because the backstory matters here. George Soros, again, began the philanthropy in 1979 with scholarships for Black students at the University of Cape Town under apartheid and for dissidents in Eastern Europe to study abroad. Early bets on opening closed systems. In 1984, he launched a foundation in Hungary and famously distributed photocopiers to independent groups to weaken the one-party grip on information. In the 1990s, OSF scaled across the former Soviet bloc and into thematic work. A $200 million International Science Foundation grant to keep research alive after the Soviet collapse, a $100 million early childhood initiative across 15 countries, emergency support during the siege of Sarajevo, tuberculosis control in Russian prisons, and in 1991, the launch of the Central European University to anchor critical inquiry in the region. By the mid-2010s, OSF had evolved into a global network of national and regional foundations, with a U.S. program launched in 1996 to take on criminal justice, immigrant rights, and other domestic issues. The U.S. hub, created in 1993 as the Open Society Institute, formally adopted the Open Society Foundation's name in 2010 to reflect that broader structure. In 2018, amid political pressure in Hungary, the organization closed its Budapest office and moved to Berlin. Cumulative spending has surpassed $23 billion since inception, and leadership has moved to Alexander Soros as the chair in 2023, and Benefer Naouji became president in 2024. So, what are OSF's true measurable impacts? And what does rigorous research show about the Open Society Foundations, the philanthropy at the center of so much of this debate? To help us separate signal from noise, we're joined next by Professor Guadalupe Correa Cabrera of George Mason University's Schar School, and again, the co-director of the Terrorism, Transnational Crime, and Corruption Center. In 2021, she co-authored a paper published in Global Studies Quarterly, and I believe one of the few, if not the only papers of its kind, that reflected a close examination of 2 decades of OSF grant data to test common claims, both positive and negative, coming from across the political spectrum about OSF's influence. In this conversation, we explore what the evidence says and doesn't say about OSF's real-world effects. Here is that conversation. Thank you very much for being willing to talk today about this topic. I know you've done a great deal of work on it right in advance of the pandemic, and then did a lot of the data compilation immediately afterwards. So I wanted to ask you a few questions about it. But first, would you mind introducing where you work and how you came to be interested in this topic?
Thank you very much, Jay, for this conversation and for inviting me to your show. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to explain this research with your audience. I'm a professor of policy and government, and my research is focused on criminal networks, on immigration matters connected always to security, and border issues. I am an expert on Mexico-U.S. relations and Mexico-U.S. border relations. That is why, of course, matters of security or criminal organizations, the cartels in particular, and immigration, on the other hand, are center of my research. And I lived 8 years at the border, and I have been doing research for 10 years on immigration, migration from Central America to Mexico. So I'm a field researcher, and this is an area, Open Society Foundations, that has been connected to immigration. They provide funding to organizations internationally, to organizations that provide help to migrants in one of their objectives, promoting equality, justice, and that is an area that, at least before 2021, was one important area of support from Open Society, and connected with organizations that deal with protection of migrants.
And I understand they've been doing that work for quite a long time in different countries around the world. I know they had funded major universities throughout Central Europe, for example, and they've done work, of course, here in the United States. Some of that has come in for a certain level of criticism, and I know that that's something that we can explore here, and people are exploring outside of conversations like this one. How did you choose to focus on the Open Society Foundation specifically, and where did that research take you and your colleagues in exploring this topic?
Yes, I became interested in Open Society Foundations, and full disclosure, I received a fellowship from Open Society Foundations to study matters of democracy and security in Latin America. And I was focused on Mexico. Um, Years later, I started to do research at migrant shelters and in Central America, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. And of course, I became familiar with the work of many of these organizations, also of media and universities. I mean, academics and academic work and higher education institutions of higher learning. And of course, Open Society was connected with studies related to immigration, particularly from Central America and the Northern Triangle, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. So because I was an Open Society fellow, also I had more connection with people related to Open Society foundations. Therefore, I will always kept an eye on what was happening. But in the year 2018, a phenomenon that really brought our attention to, I mean, among the academics and, media people and advocates working on immigration issues, particularly in the region I was working on, the migrant caravans. Mass migrations, it started a period of mass migrations, US bound mass migrations. We had seen a transformation of the migration flows we saw last century and early this century, more men and young men going, particularly from Mexico in particular, to the United States, but flows started to change. More families, women and children started to go to the United States. But 2018 was a crucial year. The migrant caravans had already been in place the years before 2018 as a concept. But in 2018, the first big mass, this mass migrations and the caravans. So when the migrant caravan arrived to Mexico, started, from Honduras, and then they crossed the country and they arrived to Tijuana, I was very interested in that subject matter, connected with my subject matter. And so I started to see a number of organizations and media people and activists that I already knew in the past that were connected with Open Society, that were very interested in covering and were very interested in supporting the migrant caravans.
And
Of course,
before you continue, let me just, for people who aren't familiar with this issue and they only hear bits and pieces, perhaps from the news media, perhaps from one perspective or another politically, what are we talking about in terms of size and scopes of these caravans as they're described, and what was the reason why so many people were starting to move northward?
well, people were moving northward already before the caravans and families. People from the Northern Triangle, people from Honduras and El Salvador, in particularly, and Guatemala too. That was not new. Through WhatsApp groups and the different media outlets and, particularly social media, they started to gather and organize, going and moving together from one place to the United States. And all of them started to know that and started to feel safer, that they were going to do, and they were pay less money to the smugglers, coyotes, or smuggling networks that I study now too. And that also brought an organic element to the organization of the caravans, because people were organically connected to this movement, right? But there were organizers and organizations that, organically or not, made sure that that was covered and that was visible and that they became political. Political because this big caravan, there was a caravan before that was also big, but this one was, more cover, received more coverage and was political because that the president then, President Trump, first administration. President Trump was first president and was president at that time. And he also utilized the image of many people coming together and arriving to the United States as a theme for the elections that were about to take place. So politicians of the left, politicians of the right, brought that to their own, motivations and objectives, and they started to talk about this. And that's what brought me and my colleagues later on to participate in this research for different reasons. But this was first my main project, and I wanted to understand why caravans were formed at that same time and how the political utilization of that might have a motivation, or there was an organization, because also I have studied in my life social mobilization, social movements. And a social movement does not just come because people want to protect themselves, as the media presented it, just covering mostly the push factors like violence and poverty and things that happen in the countries that explain U.S. bound migrations. Like a center on push factors. No, I wanted to understand why. Why suddenly so many organizations were connecting, protecting, providing providing food, providing shelter, organizing, and covering. And who was covering? Who was helping people? Why at that time? Why it became so political? Why it was supported by politicians? Why these groups were connected with politicians as well? And how, influencers of the right, influencers of the left, made these political phenomenon. And this might have some geopolitical also, connotations, or there were probably some utilizations, as we see what happens in Europe as well, right? The Belarus border, and how, some of these also caravans or mass migrations supposedly have been used to have been used to create some problems with other countries, supposedly, right? The weaponization of immigration that provides the analysis of this phenomenon on a different level, a geopolitical level.
And so, with the foundations, I know that there's a lot of different forces here at work as people move from one place to another for a variety of reasons. But why are foundations a big piece of this? Why did they go in and start assisting or trying to support people in these migrations? And why specifically did the Open Society Foundations find a role in this?
Well, the Open Society has different objectives as a foundation, right? As you all know, supporting or promoting open societies. And open society, among their objectives, promoting equality, promoting justice, democratic values, health and rights, journalism. They have that their objectives and priorities have changed since 2021, but this is what they do, right? Promoting equality and anti-discrimination. So the support of migrants has been a big task, and that goes with the objectives of open society. And open society has funded a number of organizations, as I told you, that I knew of, and some journalists that are also covering precisely the issues of immigration, migration, right? As they have covered like freedom of the press. And so open society has invested and has invested a lot of money on funding, at least in my field, a lot of organizations and journalists that protect migrants' lives, and that it's connected with their objectives. So it's not difficult to figure out that they are there, why they are there. Why open society do that beyond promoting open societies, I don't really know. but they do have a particular set of objectives that have to do with their idea. Karl Popper, and I mean that's inspired by Karl Popper, George Soros professor at LSE, open society and its enemies. So they're trying to combat the enemies and try to promote open societies. That's what open society does. So George Soros, the founder of Open Society foundations, because we're talking about different foundations, two main ones. This is in their realm on their objectives that they follow. So they have a very clear idea why they are involved there.
And
And
you mentioned that
there is
much, and you mentioned that much of the funding that you just referenced had to do with things like funding coverage, journalistic coverage of these movements of people, and obviously academic work. And so, are there? You looked at a vast body, though, of 990 data, I believe, in doing this paper with your colleagues. What did you find in all that data about the dollars that were flowing from foundations generally and OSF specifically, and what kinds of impacts, if any, did they have, positive or negative, as you saw them, in terms of supporting these communities as they move from one country to another?
right. Yes, we analyzed these 990 forms, the return of organization exempt from income tax that we all know, of open society foundations. And we analyzed it during the years 1999 to 2018. And it's worldwide. This is a huge database that was put together, and we used the foundationsearch.com. This platform is a subscription service that gathered these forms, right? So we use that to kind of like see if the objectives of open society, the main areas that open society are interested, have some impact. I mean, the funding of open society has some impact in these objectives that they have, and also considering the criticism of a number of groups and people, right? And we did that. It's a macro level study that evaluates the international influence of OSF based on its goals, its allocation of resources, and unfortunately or fortunately, we found no evidence that open society grants produce a positive impact, at least at the macro level. What macro level means is like we studied all that was reported, at least with the IRS, to all the organizations that they fund from 1999 to 2018. And we didn't see that it had at the macro level an influence on the objectives that they say they have been focused on. And they don't also have impact on the bad things that the critics highlight, like the destabilization of countries and the generation of mass migrations. So this, we don't know why this happened. We cannot allege that open society money, which was approximately 1.7 billion US dollars during this period of time. It's a massive amount of money, a massive amount of, organizations that they support. They don't, at least in the macro level, we couldn't see an impact, but this can have to do with a number of factors, right? It's probably that they are not effective and they are spending money just to do so. I don't know, or the motivations don't match with the outcomes, that maybe open society has other motivations, or the impact is too little, that the statistical noise obscures that real impact, or maybe the impact can be measured regionally or country by country, which is another possibility. But we have very insufficient data at this point, right? I mean, we don't really know. Maybe the objectives that open society have on paper are different from the real objectives. That's another possibility. But we still have to do more to try to see, right? Another thing that was very interesting in this study is that they are not, you know, the countries that are receiving funding from open society are those that already possess stronger underpinnings for an open society, which doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Why they're giving money to more developed democracies, more money to more developed democracies. That was kind of surprising. But that we don't see that outcome, right? And also we didn't see that at the macro level, this money is really helping, to promote protests or mass migrations, as a number of critics have claimed. So at the macro level, we haven't seen that either.
Right.
So
So
there's
if
the no.
there's a null effect, so to speak, then I'm sure that there were people who are wedded to the idea that these foundations are doing great things or terrible things, and they must have been quite critical of the results, especially in the current political environment. And right now, in fact, of course, the current administration has been talking about um, domestic terrorism networks and whether or not foundations are supportive of this kind of activity, left-leaning organizations, et cetera. This kind of language, it's quite volatile. What kinds of criticisms, if any, did you see coming from the right and the left when you said that effectively that at least according to their goals, their stated goals, OSF did not have a markedly positive effect on the opening of societies, nor a negative effect in terms of these issues that it seemed to be so concerning to the administration?
Yeah, this is, as I mentioned, this might have to do with limitation of data because let's be very clear here. These are this is the information that we have. The database that we put together probably is the most complete database that can help you to make a study of this type that has ever been done. I would probably say that, or at least when it was published. I haven't followed that if somebody has done something else, but I think I have never seen something like that. But it's limited, and we work really hard to explain why this is limited. But I have bad news, at least from the results of this study, for those that say that organizations or foundations like Open Society, they do a lot of great things, to promote the values of open society, stronger democracies, more accountability in governments, justice, equality. I mean, that is not proven at the macro level with the data that we have. So maybe the effect, and there's another thing, maybe the effect is going to be seen in a longer period of time, 1999 to 2018. Probably it's not, this is because these processes and the real impact might take 50 years or 100 years. We don't really know. That's a possibility too. Maybe they are good, but the effects at the macro level are more difficult to observe. As I mentioned, might be if we see regions or we see countries, but at the same time, they're giving a lot of money, much more money, to countries that are already open, to societies that are already open, which is like we saw it and we show it, like, in Europe, for example, right? And it would have made more sense if they, spend more money in those close societies that need more in terms of justice and equality, and they give more money, but they didn't. So that's bad news for those that promote the work, or that feel very hopeful about the work that organizations like this do. But also, this study, is bad news for the critics, right? And let's probably we have to analyze more about Antifa being a terrorist group, starting with the definition of domestic terrorism and the structure of groups like Antifa that I have already studied, connected with some of the professional organizers of caravans and that participate in different social movements. And this is a very decentralized social movement, I would say. And so these allegations don't make sense, as well as, these denominations like security border don't make sense. Well, but this is a big deal. It's another big topic, right? About cartels and about Antifa. But the critics, at least in this study, that also captures like protests in a very difficult, it's very difficult, right? The number of protests, we use different indexes of democracy that have their own limitations in themselves, or also, this, the impact on mobilization of people, movement of people. We didn't find an effect. But we have always to be very careful with these claims because of the limitations that our database, and usually data overall, this kind of work has. So what I'm saying is, this study found null effects on the two sides of the ideological equation, and we need to analyze much more, like each of the effects, right, of this philanthropic work. But that's what I can say about this. But the critics also need to explain us why they're critiques, right? I've been critical myself about the involvement of a number of organizations that have been connected with open society, but that does not mean that open society itself wants to do that. I cannot prove that. I have said things connecting the funding with the organizations, with a phenomenon, and that, I can just talk about trends. I can talk about possible connection of groups, philanthropic groups, economic interest, but I definitely cannot allege a conspiracy or something like that.
I do want to ask you what surprised you most about this so far? What is the lesson from it that you're also taking into the other work that you do, which is, of course, funded by, sometimes by foundations, and they have an interest in presumably doing good work. So, what most surprised you as you did this? And then what do you think the lessons are for those who are not just reading this paper, but thinking about the foundation sector and its impact?
This is a great question, because I learned so much, while doing this work. First of all, you kind of think sometimes very quickly about the objectives or the alleged objectives of foundations in overall life or politics or social impact of their funding, right? We also understand that the funding is, they fund, and they get their taxes reduced because of the funding that they provide, supposedly for a good reason. It's difficult to see that impact, but at the same time, it's very easy to make those claims. But it's important to kind of try to understand that this is much more complex. There are many factors that explain the phenomena, right? And so we cannot allege that because of one foundation, or because the founder of one foundation, attach all the bad things or the good things to the work that they do. They can do very little. And it seems to me that this macro level study with null effects show that they can do, and they can be effective in a bad way or in a good way, in a very, very little, they have very little impact, or at least it's difficult to measure that at the macro level. And that we need to consider that this phenomena have multiple explanations. And I also learned that if I have an idea, because I had the sense that, yeah, I saw in the caravans a lot of open society, but I want to figure this out. I want to investigate this better with people that think very differently than I do. I have to say something. This paper was not written by me. I am a co-author of this paper. This is a team effort. And my co-authors, Lucas Nunez, and who's one of my colleagues at George Mason, and Hayden Ludwig, who works at the Capital Research Center. That also, it's an important organization related to the world of philanthropy. We really wanted to write an article to conduct a study without without any political motivation, wanting to really use the data that we have to tell the truth, to tell the story, to see what the data say. And we were all not inclined to, to do what politicians are doing right now. They have enemies. They have, goals that are political that help them to exercise power to win elections. We didn't have that. And in a study like that, like the one that we did, we really just wanted to show and to provide the readers and to provide the community, the philanthropy community and communities that are interested in many, many topics, just what the numbers say, what the reality say. And we think that things are much more complex than easy statements that have been made, or than made by politicians, even by the president of the United States, when declaring, Antifa a terrorist organization, right? I mean, we have to be more careful about making these allegations. That I have my own prejudices, I have my own thoughts that are connected with my experience, and I can write an op-ed saying one thing, but I need to be more serious and try to get everything that I can. This study, started in 2019, was published in 2021, and this is, this is a lot of time. I mean, was finished, completed in 2021. Sorry, and that is that was a lot of work. You have to understand, and you have to do research on what the organization is about. I mean, what are their motivations? What are objectives? We have to be very rigorous in our analysis before making the statements, unless we're politicians and we're following different objectives.
Maybe just a last question, which is this field of that you've been studying more broadly, much more than just OSF or these foundations, but all this work that you've been doing over your career, your academic career. Are you seeing now, when you look at, for example, these border flows and migration issues, not just across the U.S. Border here, but around the world, are you seeing foundations playing a greater or lesser role in supporting communities that are experiencing that change?
Okay, this is a very good question, because I'm writing a book on immigration, but that's not the focus of what foundations do for this. I mean, for this. For this area. But what I saw in the case of the United States, and following, not with a lot of detail, what happens in Europe and what happens on the other side of the ocean, I think that the government is always connected with nonprofits and always connected with the work of foundations. What happened with the second Trump administration, the dismantling of USAID, and the end of the work of the United Nations, also because of the pull of money from the U.S. government. I see that that organizations work when there is money, and foundations work is also connected with government. The government will to do their work too, because they also collaborate with the private sector, right? This public-private partnership to solve problems. And if one pulls out the support, the other one too. So I see synergies in the work, the positive work, or the work in particular area, and this synergy also when pulling the money. Well, when pulling out from this. So there was a big attempt of private foundations and the government, or some governments with certain ideologies, to kind of like provide support for migrants at some point in time. And that itself promoted movements of people, usually from the of course global south to the global north. If you pull the money out, you're gonna, you also will have, a different impact. People are going to not try to move, probably, right? So I think that at least U.S. bound migration is, the flows are right now, depending on what is going to happen in terms of policy, the elections, and also the judicial system, the judiciary in the United States, the decisions that are going to be made. everything it's very complex, has to do with politics, has to do with incentives, and that has to do with money and incentives. Politics and the economy are connected, right? And it's not like they want sometimes to participate in migration and now they are not, they pulled out from here. There are many more things that explain that, and politics and where this is moving, right? For example, just let's remember in the 1990s how Democrats and Republicans were on the same page on limiting the entrance of people. This was the beginning of the Operation Gatekeeper, Operation Hold the Line during the globalization era. Many things were happening at that time. But this was a time when the two parties wanted to create some order or started with limitations, and that brought smuggling, and that brought more dangers for migrants, and that brought the foundations to work, to protect migrants. So we have to understand this cannot be just explained in this moment. This has to consider political decisions over time and a number of actors that respond to those political decisions in different areas, right?
Thank you so much for all of this. I really do appreciate it. We've been talking, of course, about the systems shaping philanthropy. Now let's turn to the factors influencing leadership from outside and from within. Mark Pittman, founder of the Concord Leadership Group, co-founder of EWTS Coaching, and author of The Surprising Gift of Doubt, helps mission-driven leaders who've built something real and suddenly feel stuck. His core idea is simple. Doubt is data. Don't fight it, use it. Learn how you're wired, clarify how you are or who you are, and build systems around your strengths. So, how do you turn uncertainty into traction and lead in a way that actually fits you? For that, I spoke with Mark earlier today, and here is that conversation. Mark, thank you very much for taking time out today to talk. Appreciate seeing you.
It's a joy to be here.
I do want to ask you about your second book, The Surprising Gift of Doubt. And maybe we can start, for those who have not seen the book, to just ask you where that title comes from.
So here, a note for all authors or entrepreneurs. It's the second book I'm known for. It's my 8th book.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So
I can't stop writing. No, somebody just informed me. They went on Amazon and they looked it up and they said, this is your 8th book. But yeah, Surprising Gift of Doubt is the book I've been trying to write for about probably 20 years. I've been an executive coach since 2003. I was certified with Franklin Covey. And my parents asked me, what do you do? And they didn't really understand, even though they were aware of coaching, and they had actually funded life coaches, leadership coaches for my wife and I when we were engaged to be married, which was a whole story of its own. But The Surprising Gift of Doubt finally came about a few years ago, where I was able to really feel like I could talk about the leader's journey and help people get through. Leadership is weird, Jay. It just, the game change when you go from getting this stuff done, doing the thing, to then having to get graded on group participation. Like, you have to do the thing through others, and the whole game seems to change, and people usually don't have the training or mentoring to get through that. So this book helps.
So when did the concept first hit you? I mean, it sounds like this has been a journey, not just for the book, but for you in discovering this or articulating it in this way. When did this whole process begin?
Part of it was awkward family meetings or awkward dinners. I mean, more dinners than family meetings, but where people would say, what do you do? And I'd say something. And if you've ever heard a coach speak, it's often, my friend Pam Slim calls it, we've gone through the doors of Narnia into this magic land. We can see the talking trees and the talking plants and animals. All the people we're talking to can see is a door. And coaches, and we do this, anybody that has a knowledge of some area has a magic door. For coaches, it's all this wonderful potential and growth and development. And we get talking very highfalutin, but we don't really share what the transformation people experience. So I kept getting frustrated. As a marketer, I know I should be better. And so that book was part of that. It was like a pebble in my shoe as I was going through my work process.
Right. So now the subtitle here, use uncertainty to become the exceptional leader you are meant to be. That explains a lot, but doesn't explain everything. So what are you talking about here? Exceptional leadership can take many forms. So what kind of leadership are you really describing here, or providing an avenue to explore through embracing doubt?
I love that you asked it that way, because leadership in the way we just define it at Concord Leadership Group is influencing others. So it could be influencing without positional authority. It could be also being promoted into a manager, senior manager, VP, CEO. The journey we see most people go through is starting out with some level of confidence because they've been promoted or they've started a thing, and so they feel like they have something to offer. As they start doing that, and they try to follow what they've seen before them. So an introvert person would follow an extrovert boss and try to start extroverting, but that doesn't work for that person. So their confidence just plummets, and they start feeling like they're broken. And most people lurch from fix to fix, certification to degree to book to time management tool to webinar and over the years, I've seen this with numbers of leaders that feel like they're faking it. They're afraid someone's going to find out that they don't really know what they're doing. And the gift of that doubt, it could be that they don't, and they need another certification and they need more research. That's fine. But the gift of that doubt could mean that they're on the verge of a breakthrough. They're on the verge of actually listening to the rest of the information sources, not just the externals, but also what is their heart saying? What is their gut saying? What is their lived experience saying? Too often we've been burned by that early in our career, so we don't trust it anymore. And our Western society teaches us to not trust it. But as we start learning how to trust different parts of our wiring, our story, our upbringing, those are the things that give us a language that doesn't sound like it's a personal. There's nothing personal about it. It's a different way of looking, a different perspective. As we develop our voice, we start realizing maybe I'm the voice that needs to be heard, or maybe our team has a perspective that will be really helpful in this conversation that hasn't been uttered before.
And I know you talk about that in terms of nudges, which I want to ask you about, but you just said something else there that struck me about getting burned early, often in our careers, and our response to that. Can you talk a bit more about that, about that being burned, and how our response to that can then dictate the path we take?
I can. And there's either burn from above, where you have a bad boss, or burn from you took a risk that you thought was a legitimate risk and you got punished for it. The story I like to share is I do about a 4-mile walk every day through some neighborhoods around our town. I did it for hundreds of times, and then one day a dog attacked me, and I noticed. And fortunately, I grew up with dogs, so I tried to, just hold my ground, and I didn't get hit or hurt, but I was scared. All the fight or flight responses were going. Every single day after that, I could feel myself a quarter of a mile away, starting to get scared again. The armor was up, the awareness, and starting to wonder, are there other dogs in other driveways that are going to run out to the street and get me? Over the months, I've met the homeowner a couple of times. I know the dog's name is Murphy now. And I just this week, at the time of this, right now, 2 days ago, Murphy ran out to the street, and I wasn't scared anymore. And I was able to say, "Hi, Murphy." And I didn't pet him yet, but that guardedness, I was shocked that guardedness is so much like our guardedness in our professions. I had that armor for over almost a year of trying to figure out, this isn't safe. I need to guard myself. And that is true in some situations, but often the armor that we wear becomes the jail that confines us. And so sometimes we need to question it maybe with the help of some noted expert. This is where counseling could be good, coaching could be good, peer groups. I love volunteering for boards like AFP boards, or International Coach Federation chapter boards, because you have peers that think more like you, and they can speak into you or see a different perspective than maybe your organizational structure allows you to see.
Wow, I wonder if there's a whole subculture that also makes many of us like Murphy. And that then reinforces this kind of fear or a reticence to take action, even though we can learn through those actions and then become better leaders.
Oh my goodness. Yes, the amygdala thing. Yeah, I wonder if Murphy had been on a social media post, I would have been getting all these other ones. I just started getting into Dungeons and Dragons, and my ads now are all the die that I could buy, which is great. I love it, but it's so much nicer than what it was before.
All right, so now to the nudges. Now you refer to that in the book. Maybe that's not the only way you refer to this, but that internal voice that you were
Yeah.
referencing a moment ago. Can you talk about that? How to rediscover it or listen to it? I know that's a big part of the feature of what you describe here in the book.
Yeah, and it's iterative too, because just like external data is not always helpful or accurate, internal it needs to be tested as well. But the three main areas we look at it are your wiring, how you're behaviorally kind of hardwired, behavior patterns, hardwiring, and your motivational, why you do the things you do. The stories that you tell about yourselves and the stories that you'd share with others as you're trying to identify yourself, and the stories you believe about life. And that's often where those nudges will come up. You start making a story and you hear yourself, so-and-so's late again. And what do you fill the blank in with? But the other nudges are when you're doing something. Like I had one client who I do a lot of fundraising coaching, and there's a science to fundraising. We've studied this stuff really well. We know what we're doing. And so I had to take off my coach hat, and I said to her, she wanted to go a different way. She had a different voice she wanted to use in her appeal or whatever. So I took off my coach hat with her permission and said, okay, if I were a consultant, I would never sign off on this appeal, because this is totally not going to rate. You're reducing your ability to raise funds for the cause that you so desperately need to fund. Blah, 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 blah. I went off, and her marketing person was on the line too and was laughing. And then I put my coach hat back on and said, but that's totally your voice. I get why you're doing it this way, and your story and the reason you created this nonprofit totally fits. Your values line up with what you want to do with this appeal. And if you're willing to lose some money because of that, then let's do it. And she was listening to her nudges of, I get the best practice and I'm not comfortable to go there yet. So oftentimes we were told in our leadership and in our work, leave your emotions at the door. You don't, or I was trained as a family member, we would go to a lot of self-help seminars, weird upbringing, which we could talk about some other time, I'm sure. But they told you that your mind is the engine of the train and your emotions are the caboose. Just keep thinking the right thoughts and your emotions will follow. There's some help to that, but there's also could be some wisdom. If you're feeling like something just doesn't seem right, spending the time in professional development or team communications, identifying your values, figuring out your goals, helps give you the wording, so you're able to then say, what about this, in a way that could be heard by people that may not have ever seen that perspective before.
You helped with a segue right here because you referenced your work with, of course, nonprofit fundraising and storytelling, which is, I know, a big part of your life, but also it's a huge part of all the work we do in fundraising, both the listening part and then the telling of the story. So I'm wondering, when it comes to coaching leaders and the work that you've done here in the book in terms of having them embrace their doubt, and listen to those voices, internal voices, is there a difference that you've seen in terms of leadership within the nonprofit sector, and particularly with fundraising leadership, and the rest? Because you work with for-profits and nonprofits. What's the difference here, if any?
Well, one of the things before the lockdowns, I was able to do intensives where we took what I call quadrant 3 leadership, which is that journey I was talking about. I brought in for-profit and nonprofit leaders into day-long intensives, and it was beautiful to see people realize this is human. This is a human thing. These are human conditions. This doubt is shared by most everybody, that we all feel like we're making it up, because the honest truth about leadership is we haven't been this way before. Wherever we are, we haven't been there with this group of people with these sets of pressures. So we are all making it up as we go. It's to some extent. Nonprofit leadership, though, is I'm frustrated by board members that say we need to run more like a business, because in a business, a boss has authority and responsibility to make decisions. They have a staff they train, they serve their customer, and that customer service creates the revenue structure that funds the business. But for a nonprofit, the CEO has all the responsibility and none of the authority. The board has the authority to make most of the big decisions. And then they have a staff that they're trying to help do the customer service, but the customer service doesn't fund the thing. It's this other group called donors. So no matter how good the job, how good you are at solving the problem that you became the CEO to solve, you have to learn to speak this other dialect of donors that don't center their life around your work. And you have to always be entertaining. You're acting more like a middle manager, always entertaining the thoughts and the insights and the somewhat ignorance, but well-meaning time that they're putting into of the board. So I think while all this is universal in some level, I think nonprofit leaders are. I joke on stage. I say they're wake up every morning to be drawn and quartered, because the staff doesn't understand why you're spending so much time with the board and donors. The donors don't understand what you're doing, and you keep trying to get to them. The board thinks that you're an executive assistant, not an executive director. So that's why I always call this nonprofit leader a CEO, because the board immediately gets the gravitas of that instead of dumping more tasks every board meeting to the admin assistant.
Right. And then when you look at something as narrow as the fundraising role, and I know that can be a person who's doing everything, or it can be
Sure.
one person out of 600 in a university or a major hospital system. But is that the same? I mean, because they maybe have more people to report to or to listen to, is it fundamentally the same kind of leadership issue?
Well, and with fundraising, part of the leadership issue is that the organization doesn't exist for that. The organization exists for something else, and you're a means to that end. But so that's why it's ridiculous. And when we're at times like right now, we see professional development and fundraising being cut from organizations for, which is like, we need gas to drive across country, but we're not going to pay for it. Or we're not going to go to a gas station. I mean, it's just sort of ridiculous that you would not resource that. But part of that's on fundraisers. They haven't done the work to figure out with the programs people why to show programs people that donors care about their work, and they haven't done the work of telling the story internally well enough about what fundraising is. And then there are some fundraisers that are consistently reinforcing systemic inequity, as opposed to really learning how to tell ethical stories and how to make it so that you're not putting programs people or the recipients in harm's way, or the cause in harm's way, by trying to create a really dramatic story. So I think there's a lot of work that fundraisers need to do. But if there were one fix for fundraisers listening to this, or I would say CEOs, if you're a CEO of a nonprofit or a manager of a fundraiser and you're frustrated with the lack of fundraising performance, you need to train yourself on fundraising. 9 out of 10 leaders that are frustrated with their nonprofits' fundraising aspects don't know how fundraising works. They think it's something that is invoiceable, something that you can bill a donor like you'd bill a client, and they don't understand the nuances. They don't understand even the dialect of donors, that it's not marketing. It's not talking about your nonprofit, as important as that is. Fundraising is connecting a donor with an impact and removing the nonprofit from that equation. Because donors, as our friend Stephen Screen says, donors aren't stupid, but they're busy. And so they need to see themselves in the impact, and, oh, I could be connected with that. A great book is It's Not Just About the Money. It would be a very good book for people to read, by Jeff Schreifels and Richard Perry. It's about how to manage major gift fundraisers, because oftentimes major gift fundraisers don't like to be data people. To the major gift fundraisers that are there, I see that and I say, it's really good to put the data into the CRM, because it's kind of job security so that the tactical people can see, oh, there are touches being made. There are things that are being done. I could go on for days about this, so I'll turn it back to you.
Well, kind of wrapping this all together, I realized I took a microscope to the book, and then I failed to pull back and look at it with a telescope. So if you were looking at the totality of the book and then how people might apply it, what would that be? When people are thinking about all these issues writ large, what is the real importance of thinking through all this, not just doing the work personally, but thinking through it as a whole, so they can discuss it internally and make a commitment to embracing doubt?
I think the risk of not doing this work, whether it's this book or any other way of self-discovery, is that you'll go through life feeling like you're broken, you're lying to people, and you're faking it. And you'll nurse it. That story will just become self-fulfilling prophecy, as opposed to just saying, maybe I'm not, maybe I'm seeing a different perspective. Maybe I'm not broken. Maybe there's another way to do this. And risking growing into the full potential of all you can be and all you can add to the world or your team.
Thank you for all this, Mark. Really do appreciate it. And congratulations again on your 8th book. So I know this came out 2 years ago, but do you have other things that are in the hopper, either for a second edition of this or other work that's coming up soon?
Ask Without Fear, the second edition, the 20th anniversary edition of my first book, Ask Without Fear. I was just in talks with the publisher about doing, because that'll be up in a couple of years. So, and it's still selling well. So I'd love to fix it. First books you learn, like everything in life. The first time you do something, you learn what you wish you had done. So I want to put all those lessons into it.
Well, and I know we'll be talking about that with you very soon in our companion series. Thank you so much, Mark Pittman, for all of this. Again, and my thanks to both of our guests today and to all of you for listening to what I know is a long, but I hope very informative program, especially in the foundation front, as well as the conversation with Mark, which leads into a session he will be conducting in our How to Raise series in just 2 weeks' time. So look for that on October 30, I believe that is. On the PM podcast, we talk with Bill Tedesco, founder of DonorSearch. You can listen to that wherever you like to listen to podcasts or over on the DonorSearch website. We look back at how it all started, how prospecting and fundraising have changed, where philanthropy is headed next, as well as get a glimpse of his personal trajectory. Beginning tomorrow, DonorSearch will hold its first ever virtual user conference, Virtually Unstoppable. It runs on both Wednesday and Thursday of this week, and this free gathering will share insights from Giving USA, strategies for fundraising amid budget cuts, AI roadmaps and practical tools, ideas for screening implementation, and plans for donor engagement that works. All of this with CFRE credits as well. And How to Raise returns next Friday, October 17th, with PROST, Proactive Strategic Research, a $1 billion tool for cultural transformation with Ted Wynn, Senior Manager, Principal Gifts, Research and Strategy at National Geographic Society. I know you won't want to miss that. Or this program, which comes to you, of course, on Tuesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern. That's Frontlines of Social Good, where we bring you the latest news and gifts and interviews with people shaping all that content. You can catch past programs anytime at DonorSearch.net, home of our longtime sponsor, DonorSearch, the global leader in AI-powered fundraising intelligence solutions. Until next time, take care and do good.